So I'm going to pick up kind of where I left off in part one. Just a reminder, I am reading select passages from chapter 6 of Arthur Kemp's March of the Titans. It's a really great work. I highly recommend purchasing it. I think it's available in, hardcover, paperback. I have the Kindle version myself. It's a couple of volumes. Obviously, I'm only sharing small pieces, but I'm taking excerpts that go along with and support other things that I've talked about and that I want to talk about in more depth in the future. And the only way for me to really talk about some of these things in more depth in the future is to give you some of this foundational knowledge that I've gained largely from these volumes. Not exclusively from here. There's a lot of other things, some of which I'll also share from other works, and some of my own thoughts, which I've developed as a product of reading a lot of different things by a lot of different authors, considering a lot of evidence. So last time we kind of talked about Asia. Today we are going to be moving more into the Americas before Columbus. And again, just let me give this little disclaimer. There are words in here that I don't know how to pronounce, such as Guanches. If anyone knows how to pronounce these words properly, more power to you. I'm just reading them phonetically. I've not heard most of them pronounced. I've only read some of these words in text. So especially if it's based on some Native American dialect or some Chinese dialect or ancient Sumerian, I don't have the background to know how to properly pronounce all of that words. But I'm going to read it anyway, and just forgive me if I don't get every single word pronounced perfectly. So, the Guanches of the Canary Islands, that's just how I'm going to say it. It's spelled Guanches. Off the coast of West Africa lie the Canary Islands, a region which became home to a mysterious group of Nordics who, in antiquity, were known as the Guanches. While it is unknown for sure how they arrived on the islands, what is certain is that they shared a number of cultural characteristics with the ancient Egyptians, and that their building style appears to have been replicated in South and Central America. First of all, I just want to point out that this is off the coast of West Africa, and these are Nordic-type people. Obviously, a lot of people describe blacks as African, and that creates some confusion, because then, people like the Afrocentrist will say, oh, well, Egypt was in Africa, therefore the Egyptians were black. That's not the right way of thinking about it. That's confusing a race with a geographic region. A lot of North Africa was settled by white people because it's around the Mediterranean region. Rather than thinking in terms of land masses, in that particular region it almost makes more sense to think in terms of the trade routes and the coastlines. But anyway, it is possible to see what the Guanches looked like due to the fortuitous existence of some of their mummies, which are on display in the Canary Islands National Museum. The corpses on display are estimated to be between 600 and 1,000 years old. It's just an estimate, though, could be older. And my bet would be that they are probably quite a bit older. But that's just my guess. An examination of one of the mummy's bodies showed incisions that almost matched those found in Egyptian mummies, although the string used by the Guanche embalmers to close the wounds was much coarser than what the Egyptian experts used. The Guanches also possessed the art of writing, although this has not yet been the subject of any major study. I wonder why not. The most stunning link between the Guanches and the Egyptians comes in the form of pyramids. The Guanches built several small step pyramids on the islands, using exactly the same model as those found in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. The pyramids have an east-west alignment, which indicates that they were probably used for religious purposes, most likely associated with the rising and setting of the sun. And these megalithic structures around the world, that's really a topic for a whole other set of videos, which I do plan to do. So obviously there's going to be things left out in these. Carefully built stairways on the west side of each pyramid lead up to the summit, which in each case has a flat platform covered with gravel, possibly used for religious or ceremonial purposes. The famous explorer Thor Heyerdahl, who rediscovered the pyramids on the Canary Islands, and who set up an academic body to study the phenomenon, argued that the pyramids may be remains from explorers who sailed the Atlantic in ancient times, and who may have possibly forged a link with the pre-Columbian civilizations of the Americas. As the original inhabitants of the Canary Islands were fair-haired and bearded, it was possible, Heyerdahl suggested, that long before the 15th century, people of the same stock as those who settled the Canary Islands also sailed the same route along the Canary Current that took Christopher Columbus to the Americas. This theory formed the basis of Heyerdahl's famous Raw expeditions, in which he showed that it was possible to cross the Atlantic in an Egyptian reed boat. In fact, Columbus's starting point was the Canary Islands, where he obtained supplies and water on Gomera, the island next to Tenerife, however the fuck you say that. The Guanches on Tenerife in 1492 did not permit Columbus to land on their island. They were not impressed by the physical appearance of the bearded Europeans who looked like the Guanches. When Columbus and the Europeans who followed in his wake landed in the Americas, they were welcomed and initially worshipped as gods, since the beardless Indians they encountered believed that the Spanish belonged to the same people as the legendary founders of their civilization, bearded men from across the Atlantic Ocean. According to the Aztec and Olmec, their god, Quetzalcoatl, had Nordic features, eyes and hair color, and a beard. This god came from over the sea and taught the American Indians how to raise corn and build structures. And I just want to remind you that in part 1, we talked about legends and myths in China that say basically the same thing. There is a marked similarity between the step pyramids on the Canary Islands and those in Central and South America, strongly suggesting yet another great lost white migration, this time to Central and South America, perhaps 1,000 years or more before Columbus. There is also clear evidence from the Mexican side of the Atlantic Ocean that whites, blonde-haired whites, reached that part of the world long before the Spanish explorations of the late 1490s. On the walls of the Temple of the Warriors, Chichen Itza, located on the east coast of Mexico, are a series of paintings depicting white prisoners captured by dark-skinned natives, and then a white man with long blonde hair being sacrificed by the non-whites. These paintings date from before Christopher Columbus sailed the Atlantic in 1492. Now at this point I just kind of want to point back to part 1 where we talked about that the remains of some white woman in ancient China who had been mutilated. And there seems to be some evidence of some kind of slaughter going on. Basically a genocide and ethnic cleansing. We're going to see evidence that this probably took place here too. I think these old Mexican paintings showing blonde-haired whites being sacrificed, ritualistically murdered by the so-called natives is just one piece of the evidence. Of course, we're always told that, after Columbus, the white Europeans, slaughtered and genocided the Native Americans. The conclusion that I've come to is that it's probably the other way around, but going back even further. So the so-called Native Americans that the white Europeans allegedly wiped out after Columbus were the same people who had wiped out the original white settlers in the Americas long before Columbus. So if you believe in karma, there might have been some kind of payback there. But again, it's worth pointing out that it's mostly a lie, this idea that white Europeans genocided the Native Americans. They mostly died of diseases such as smallpox, which the European migrants carried. But it's a very different thing to say that I was a carrier of a disease, someone else caught it, and they died of that disease, versus I killed them. Those are two very different things. One implies guilt and intent, the other does not. If you're inclined to believe in God and stuff like that, and if you think that maybe God sometimes uses diseases and so on to punish people or nations, then that raises interesting questions that I'm not going to pursue in this discussion. Let me get back to the text. The existence of the red-haired Guanches on the Canary Islands, combined with the red-haired pre-Columbus mummies found in South America, and the marked similarity in pyramid building styles, indicate that whites probably used the Canary Current to cross the Atlantic, most likely between 2000 and 500 BC. Now, at this point, I'm just going to note that is a very interesting date range that correlates to the history of Israel. And as I've said in other places, it is my belief that the ancient Israelites were also white. They were very different from the modern group that calls themselves Jews, which are actually Khazars or Edomites. But again, that's a topic for another discussion. We will get back to it. But every now and then I just want to throw things out so that you can see how I see things fitting together. It will take a while for me to paint the full picture. Gwanghae artifacts, such as cave murals, tombs, stone and mortar walls, broken pottery, and other everyday items, are abundant on the island. Similar artifacts have been found on the African continent, notably in Morocco, indicating that at some stage the Guanches crossed the sea to Africa, or possibly from Africa, I might suggest. And I actually think that's probably much more likely. I think it was probably an Egyptian outpost or something like that. That would be my guess. But that is just a guess at this point. There, they started mixing with Arabic and other non-white racial types. My suggestion here is that that probably took place quite a bit later. This is likely the cause of some flashes of blonde hair and light-colored eyes found among the Berber population of northwest Africa to this day. The pyramids and other structures on the island seem to have been constructed by an advanced people. By the time of the Spanish invasion, the Guanches had lost much of their civilized apparel, and Spanish accounts have it that they were attacked by naked tribesmen, who sometimes inflicted serious military defeats upon the invading Spaniards. It was only in 1496 that the Spaniards finally defeated the last of the Guanches. The arrival of the white Spanish in the mid-14th century saw the remaining Nordic Guanches absorbed into the new settler population. The blonde, blue-eyed, tall stock has been preserved in part and can still be seen today in many individuals on the island. Culturally speaking, the Guanche civilization was completely absorbed by the imported continental European culture, so that the Canary Islands remain Spanish territory to this day. Now we're going to move up into North America. One of the most enigmatic of the lost great white migrations is the existence of skeletal remains in North America. These date from as early as 7000 BC. appear to be white in nature, and most certainly are not Native American or American Indian, whose racial traits are Mongoloid or Asiatic, derived from the original homeland of the American Indian peoples. There's just a couple of things I want to interject here. Number one, the date, around 7000 BC, or close to 10,000 years ago, is pretty significant, as anyone who is familiar with the astronomical or astrological alignments of the pyramids and other structures will be aware. There's something very significant about that date, which many of these ancient megalithic sites and structures point to. I also want to point out here that the author uses the term white to describe what I prefer to call the Aryan race. That's fine, I guess. I don't personally like that term a lot. I would rather describe myself as Anglo-Saxon or Caucasian or Aryan, but to each his own, But I just feel like the term black is not really considered politically correct. So why should white be? Can you imagine referring to Asians as yellow people these days? There would be a absolute shitstorm. So I don't really like the label white any more than that. I think that also kind of creates room for this argument that I've heard people making a lot, which is that race is nothing more than a difference in skin color. There's obviously a lot more to racial difference than just melanin or skin pigmentation. But anyway, it is beyond dispute that white tribes reached China. Compared to the distance those whites traveled, it would have been a relatively short hop across the rest of Asia to the Bering Straits, which divides Asia and North America, and then into the North American continent. This was exactly how the American Indians got to North America. There's no reason why advanced groups of whites could not have traveled this route even before the American Indians. It is equally possible that early whites could have sailed from Western Europe, hugging the last ice pack along its coastline past present-day Greenland. Other evidence supports this possibility. In 1940, a mummified and well-preserved body was unearthed in the Spirit Cave complex, located in the American state of Nevada. The mummy's scalp was complete, and skin remained on the back and shoulders. On the head, there was a small tuft of straight dark hair which changed a reddish brown when exposed to light. Artifacts discovered in the Spirit Cave totaled some 67 items, including knives, baskets, and animal bones. The mummy was lying on a fur blanket, dressed in a twisted skin robe with leather shoes on its feet, and a twined mat sewn around its head and shoulders. A similar mat was wrapped around the lower portion of the body. 2 bags contained cremation ashes and bone fragments. The style of weaving used in the textiles is known as diamond-plated matting. This is a complex system requiring a high degree of sophistication in material manufacture technology that would have rivaled any on the planet at the time. The corpse became known as the Spirit Cave Mummy and was placed in the Nevada State Museum's storage facility for decades. Only in 1994 was the mummy rediscovered and the startling truth revealed. Tests showed that the corpse was 9,400 years old. A 45 to 55-year-old male, and most importantly, not an ancestor of any modern Indian tribe. Now, at this point, I just want to interject that since this book has been published, I have come across articles online that try to dispute this, and apparently there have been some kind of genetic test done on the mummy. And in the articles that I've read, which are intended to debunk this, they try to cast doubt or disprove that this is a white Aryan mummy. And they say that DNA tests or whatever show a relationship between this mummy and another modern Native American tribe. Now, these articles, rather tellingly, don't go into much depth. Based on the skull, analysis of the skull, and lots of other things, it's very, very clear that this was not a Native American body that was discovered. What I think happened is once these people were basically wiped out, probably partly through slaughter and probably also partly through miscegenation, some of the DNA markers probably are going to be found in certain modern Native American tribes because of intermixing. This would be like, imagine centuries or even thousands of years in the future, white people have gone extinct, but someone digs up some old remains from North America and says, oh wow, these remains do not appear to match modern races in the area. Let's just say in the future America has become like a black country, populated by African Americans basically. Now we know that African Americans have on average, I think, somewhere around 20-25% European DNA. So when they test it, they're going to say, oh wow, there's certain genetic markers here that match this old mummy we found. That doesn't mean that that mummy was black. Do you see the analogy there? So the way this article was written, the one that kind of sets out to debunk the spirit cave mummy and all that, I think it's being disingenuous, and I think it's doing something similar. I think it's trying to say that because a genetic relationship is shown, or at least maybe there's certain genetic markers, it doesn't specify in the article. I'd like to see the research and give other people a chance to kind of cross-examine the evidence. Anyway, the point I'm making is that I think this is pretty solid. It fits with the total pattern of evidence, and I'm going to present mountains and mountains of evidence that support this broad picture, right? So even if someone was able to debunk the spirit cave mummy in particular, that doesn't wipe away this sea of evidence that points toward the same broad picture. But don't be surprised if you do see articles or things out there that claim to debunk specific pieces of evidence that I'm presenting here. But very often I think those are deceptive and they're kind of skewed. But anyway, the age was determined by performing 7 separate radiocarbon dating tests on samples of bone, hair, and the 2 reed mats in which he was buried. The spirit cave mummy's white racial traits are undeniable. It has a long, small face and a large cranium, in sharp contrast to the mongoloid features of American Indians. The spirit cave mummy represents some form of non-American Indian, and most likely white, settlement or incursion into North America around the year 7000 BC. The Nevada State Museum went public with its findings on the mummy in 1996. It immediately sparked a furor with the American Indians, demanding that the corpse be reburied in accordance with tribal custom, falsely claiming the spirit cave mummy as one of their own. The American Indian tribe involved, the Peyotes, laid claim to the corpse under an American law, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990, which allows for the return and reburial of bodies of Native Americans. An extended legal dispute arose over the issue of ownership. As part of the legal wrangling, the Peyote have consistently refused to allow DNA testing of the corpse. Like I said, my understanding is that DNA tests have actually been done and they have found some type of marker now, apparently, that links this mummy to a modern Native American tribe. But like I say, that doesn't prove that the mummy was Native American. All it really proves is that some of the genes from this race of people that existed back then got absorbed by other non-whites who also came at some point, and that some of those genes were passed on and inherited by the Native American tribes that have existed through to this day. Because they didn't really publish the details of their DNA test, that's what I think is probably going on. Like I said, it seems that features of the skull and so on clearly show that this is not a Native American Mongoloid corpse. It appears to be more Anglo-Saxon, racially speaking. So this is not the only case where American Indians have blocked the study of obviously non-American Indian remains. Another case, that of Kennewick Man, was similarly held up by Indian objections. And in 1993, another skeleton was found near Bull in the state of Idaho. The latter remains were some 10,600 years old. Again, that's a very significant date that we will come to again and again, making them the oldest ever found in North America. Let that sink in. The oldest remains ever found in North America do not seem to be of so-called natives, but seem to be more Caucasoid. So who were the original Americans? That's an interesting question to ponder. And we're going to keep looking at more and more evidence pointing in the direction of the earliest inhabitants of the Americas being white. The skeleton was turned over to local Indians, the Shoshone-Bannock tribe, and reburied before any comprehensive testing could be undertaken. In this way, several unique anthropological specimens have already been given to and buried by Indian tribes. In Montana, naturally shed human hair discovered by one archaeologist elicited an American Indian claim. Although the hair had not been buried in any kind of ritual, the U.S. federal government has prevented testing of the hair to commence. The reason for the American Indian sensitivity over the issue is obvious. Proof that whites, even if only in small numbers, walked the continent of North America before the American Indians themselves would undermine the latter's claim to be the original Native Americans. For the sake of political correctness, much valuable scientific data is being suppressed. On July 28, 1996, another dramatic find was made in the state of Washington, in the northwestern United States. On that day, a well-preserved skeleton was found in the Columbia River in Kennewick. This skeleton has become known as Kennewick Man. The nearly intact skeletal remains, found with the stone arrowhead lodged in the pelvic bone, are so clearly non-American Indian and so close to white that forensic anthropologists and local police first thought them to be those of a 19th century white male, about 45 years old, who was killed by an arrow, possibly murdered in some kind of race war or genocide against these people. Who knows? Radiocarbon dating of a finger bone, however, showed it to have great age, at least 9,000 years old, putting the individual on the North American continent around the year 7,200 BC. Like the Spirit Cave mummy, Kennewick Man's white racial traits are the cause of much controversy. Local American Indian tribes filed claims for possession of Kennewick Man. After a protracted legal dispute, scientists won the right to forensically examine the remains. Initial examination of Kennewick Man's skull indicated a likely white, even Nordic, cranial structure, differing greatly from the Mongoloid skull shape of American Indians. The man was a little over 5.5 feet tall and of slender build. The skull is dolichocranial rather than brachycranic, the face narrow rather than broad and flat. The average cranial index for Nordic racial types is 74. Now, I'm going to admit I'm not familiar with the words dolichocranial and brachycranic. If you do, hopefully that means something to you. If not, maybe we can look it up and we'll figure it out, but I'm going to move on. Other features are a long, broad nose that projects markedly from the face and high, round orbits. The mandible is V-shaped with a pronounced deep chin. Many of these characteristics are definitive of present-day white peoples. Other nearby finds of bone needles, close to the Kennewick Man's remains, assume that he may possibly have worn tailored clothing. These astonishing finds reveal that Kennewick Man was not alone, but that he lived in a community of some numbers. In October 1999, the U.S. government issued a report on Kennewick Man, claiming that the skeletal remains possibly resembled the Ainu racial type found in Japan. The Ainu also have strong Caucasian features, suggesting some type of ancient white ancestry, although this has to date not been borne out yet by genetic research. In Oregon, there is a cave known as the Fork Rock Cave, which has been the center of a number of significant non-biological finds. In 1938, 70 pairs of sandals made of sagebrush were discovered, and radiocarbon dating technology dated them at 9,000 years old. Charcoal was also found, with a radiocarbon date indicating it was 13,200 years old. The sagebrush sandals were intricately woven, and the other items found in the cave, including projectile points, scrapers, drills, a wooden trigger for a trap, small pieces of basketry, and awls to make leather or tailored clothing for the Kennewick Man and his peers, all of which indicated highly skilled workers. These items all differ vastly from contemporary Indian artifacts in ancient and North America, and in present-day Indian findings. In fact, red-haired enemies featured in local Indian legends, or what were thought to be legends, until the discovery of what became known as the Lovelock mummies. The Peyote Indians, the same ones who object to the scientific investigation of the Spirit Cave mummy, had a number of legends dealing with red-haired enemies, who they called the Sitika. Significantly, the name Sitika means tool eaters, tool being the fibrous reed, which is the base material of the mats in which the Spirit Cave mummy was buried. Tool is no longer found in the region, and was likely imported along with the people who used it. According to the Peyote legends, the red-haired peoples were warlike, and a number of the Indian tribes joined together in a long war against them. Eventually, the last of the Sitika were trapped in what is now called Lovelock Cave. When they refused to come out, the Indians piled brush before the cave mouth and set it aflame. The Sitika were incinerated. Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, daughter of Peyote chief Winnemucca, again, I apologize if I'm saying these names horribly. I don't speak whatever the fuck language this is. But anyway, Sarah related many stories about the Sitika in her book, Life Among the Peyotes. On page 75, she wrote, "My people say that the tribe we exterminated had reddish hair. I have some of their hair, which has been handed down from father to son. I have a dress which has been in our family a great many years, trimmed with the reddish hair. I am going to wear it sometime when I lecture. It is called a mourning dress, and no one has such a dress but my family." So it sounds like these people basically committed a small-scale genocide, at least, against an ancient white, red-haired tribe of people in North America, and they kept some of their hair as a souvenir and have woven it into a dress. Can you imagine if any group of white people did something like this with the hair of some other non-white group that they committed mass murder against? Can you imagine? And I'm going to continue here in just a minute, but I also want to point out one of the things that you may notice throughout this series is that it is dangerous to be a white minority in a majority non-white area. They seem to have this habit of wanting to kill us, and we see that going on to this day in South Africa, for example. In 1931, further skeletons were discovered in the Humboldt Lake bed. 8 years later, a mystery skeleton was unearthed on a ranch in the region. In each case, the skeletons were exceptionally tall, much taller than the surrounding American Indians. There's a small display on the Sitka in the Lovelock Museum today, but it ignores the evidence which indicates that the Sitka were not American Indians. The Nevada State Historical Society also displays some artifacts from the cave. Yet another non-American Indian skeleton has been found at a place called Pyramid Lake in Nevada. The remains are known as Wizard's Beach Man. This skeleton has been dated at 9,225 years old. Once again, the skull shape is distinctly long, that is, European, and very different to the Mongoloid shape of original American Indian racial types. In December 2002, it was announced that a skeleton, which had been in Mexico City's National Museum of Anthropology since 1959, had been identified as being more than 13,000 years old, the oldest skeleton yet found in the Americas. Dubbed Peñon Woman 3, the skeleton's skull, dolichocraniatic, or long-faced, was what attracted the attention of scientists, as the American Indian population has broad, mongoloid-shaped skulls. Scientists speculated that the skull was possibly of Ainu extraction, just like the Kennewick Man. So once again, we're finding that the oldest surviving remains in the North Americas don't seem to match up with the so-called Native Americans, but seem to have more in common with the modern Caucasian people. Those who argue for an ancient white settlement of North America, based on the large number of non-American Indian, European-like skeletal remains found on that continent, were boosted by a 1998 announcement on the existence of a genetic link between American Indians and Old European white populations. The genetic findings were announced in 1998 by Theodore Schur, a molecular anthropologist from Emory University in Atlanta, at a meeting of the American Association of Physical Anthropologists in Salt Lake City. Science Magazine, Volume 280, April 24, 1998. The data from a genetic marker named Lineage X suggests definite links between ancient whites and Native Americans. It implies that ancient European peoples, who reached North America, after first presumably migrating through Asia, still retained a distinct genetic makeup, which then passed into the New World populations through later physical mingling. According to these Lineage X findings, white populations from Europe were most likely among the North American continent's earliest settlers. The lineage X markers and possible source populations have been studied by Emory researchers Michael Brown. Not the Michael Brown of the Black Lives Matter movement, I'm pretty sure, and Douglas Wallace, Antonio Toroni of the University of Rome, and Hans-Jürgen Bandelt of the University of Hamburg. Lineage X, a site of genetic variation, is found in mitochondrial DNA, and thus it is passed only through the maternal line. It is one of 5 markers or haplogroups in mitochondrial DNA now identified in Native Americans, of which the other 4, A through D, are shared by Asians and American Indians, in accordance with widely accepted theories of their ancient links. The 5th genetic marker, lineage X, occurs at low frequencies in both modern and ancient remains of Native Americans, and in some European and Middle Eastern groups, including Italians, Spaniards, Finns, Turks, and Bulgarians. Crucially, lineage X does not occur in any Asian population, including those of Tibet, Mongolia, Southeast Asia, or Northeast Asia. Brown and his co-workers had expected to find the genetic marker in Asia, like the other 4 Native American markers, and are now pressed to account for the gap in their data. This and other evidence persuasively indicates that groups of whites migrated from Europe to North America over 9,000 years ago, and at a later stage mixed with American Indian stock to cause this 5th genetic marker to appear in North America. If the general theory of a white presence in ancient North America is accurate, then it would be logical that such a population would have left behind some buildings or settlements. In this regard, the existence of megalithic structures and even small square building cities on that continent needs to be reevaluated in light of the new discoveries as outlined before. The most dramatic of the early structures on the North American continent is to be found at a site called Mystery Hill, located near the town of Salem in the American state of New Hampshire. There, a 30-acre megalithic site, in many respects identical to those found in Western Europe and equally as old, has been open to the public since 1958. While diggings at the America's Stonehenge site have produced artifacts from most time periods, the most significant find has been an etching which experts have identified as Celtic in nature, raising the tantalizing possibility that it was the subject of an early settlement from the European mainland. Although the site has been open to the public for decades, it's still one of America's most unknown structures because of the racial implications it contains. The building technique and style is identical to the megalith structures found in Western Europe and is completely foreign to the American Indians. The fact that America's Stonehenge is still largely unknown to the wider public is an example of the malicious suppression of an important archaeological site for the political implications which it carries. The complex consists of a number of large-shaped standing stones covering some 30 acres. Like Stonehenge in England, the structures can be used to determine the occurrence of specific solar and lunar events of the year. A number of stones found in the area show man-made markings, with some of them showing links to early European scripts. In addition to these buildings, a number of ironworking sites have been discovered. Ironworking was foreign to the American Indians and was a trademark of the Indo-European peoples. The presence of 9,000-year-old, seemingly European-like skeletal remains, and these ancient structures, serves as powerful evidence of pre-American Indian whites in North America. All indications are that most of these whites were exterminated in conflict with the American Indians, with survivors being physically absorbed into the American Indian population. And like I said earlier, regarding that article I found purporting to debunk the Spirit Cave mummy connection, it's not surprising that we would find genetic markers from these ancient white people in the modern mixed-race descendants of these people and the so-called Native American tribes who wiped them out. Archaeologists and historians are of the unanimous opinion that the American Indians did not have smelting or iron casting technology or ability. Yet in a number of areas in North America, remains of iron smelting furnaces have been found. They all follow designs which had previously only been found in Europe. The ability to work iron was one of the single biggest advances which originated with the Indo-Europeans. The most famous of these iron furnaces is to be found on Spruce Hill, a flat-top mountain in the Scioto Valley in south-central Ohio. The collapsed walls of a surrounding fort and other buildings, some 200,000 tons of cut rock, are still to be seen on the site, which was first fully explored by Arlington Mallory in 1948, and detailed in his book, The Rediscovery of Lost America, E.P. Dutton, New York, 1979. Mallory went on to discover 14 other ironworking sites, which clearly were foreign to the American Indians, in the Deer Creek Valley, about 10 miles from Spruce Hill. What makes the iron smelting sites so significant is the fact that they are identical to sites found in Europe. At some stage of prehistory, it seems likely that Europeans managed to sail the divide between Europe and North America. Most likely, the route taken would have followed the far north from Scandinavia to Greenland, and then possibly along the ice pack coast down into the northeastern seaboard of the North American continent. Now we're going to move on to the mystery of the Anasazi. The mysterious ruins of the cliff dwellings in Nevada and elsewhere in the western United States have baffled archaeologists and historians. Square stone structures were foreign to the American Indians, and local Indian legends claimed that the buildings were first created by a mysterious people called the Anasazi, who inhabited the area before the American Indians. So let that sink in. According to the Native Americans themselves, according to their own myths and legends, they did not create these structures. They were created by another race of people that was there before them. So the Indians themselves admit this. Given the lineage X and other skeletal evidence proving the existence of whites in America, either prior to or at the very least simultaneous with the American Indians, a strong circumstantial case could be made for white origins of the very European-looking buildings which are currently shown to tourists as American Indian-created structures. Only a racial examination of the surrounding grave sites will provide the final answer to the issue. There are hundreds of similar structures to be found all over the Southwest. While all are attributed to American Indians, the question can be rightly asked, if American Indians did indeed build these structures, why were they living in buffalo skin tents when Europeans colonized that country after the 1500s? The evidence indicates that the first whites in America were killed in open warfare with American Indians, who may have arrived simultaneously or afterwards, and that the survivors were absorbed into what became the numerically dominant American Indian groups. The existence of the lineage X gene string adds credence to this. As mitochondrial DNA is transmitted only through the female line, it is obvious that the white males were killed by the non-whites, and the white females were taken alive by the American Indians for sexual purposes. In other words, raped. This can be the only reason why mitochondrial DNA gene strings have been found among the American Indians. The first whites in America disappeared, along with their culture, through a process of racial integration, leaving behind only skeletons and artifacts as evidence of their existence. So that is quite a bit of information to let sink in. So I'm going to end there for now, and I'm going to pick up with part 3 pretty soon. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell for notifications so that you get notified when I publish part 3 and maybe part 4, who knows how many parts after this. But even more importantly, be sure to subscribe to my channel on BitChute. The links will be in the description below. It's important that you subscribe to me on BitChute because it's extremely likely that I'm not going to be on YouTube for very much longer. That's not because I plan to leave, but I see the way things are going on YouTube right now, and I think that more likely than not, my channel will probably end up being deleted. And even if my channel isn't deleted, it's very likely that quite a few of my videos will be deleted. I will probably get strikes and not be able to publish and so on, but I am expecting that sooner or later this channel on YouTube is going to no longer exist. So be sure to follow me on BitChute and Minds. Again, all of my links are in the description below, and so are links where you can support me through PayPal or Patreon. My channel is not monetized. I'm not a very big channel, so I'm not making a lot of money by publishing these videos, but a lot of time and work does go into it. So if you'd like to say thank you for the time and work that I'm putting into publishing all of this stuff and sharing all of this information, and if you'd like to help support me so that I'm able to keep doing it, donations are definitely appreciated. So I will end there. Peace.